What if I told you that in the very same year, he won the Ballon d'Or? Or the highest individual honor in football. Luka Modric was one of the most hated men in his own country. It sounds impossible, right? This is the story of a hero forged in the fires of war, a genius who was repeatedly rejected, and a national icon who at the absolute peak of his powers was nearly sent to prison. It's a story so dramatic, so full of heartbreak and triumph that you simply have to hear it to believe it. So make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell, because you won't want to miss a single second of this journey. Enjoy the story of Luka Modric. There's an interview where Luka Modric was once asked if his children knew the full story of his life, the real story. He replied almost quietly, "No, I haven't told them about it. They've seen my old house, but they don't know what happened there. They're too young. They're not ready to know." And as he said that, you can't help but wonder, what happened there? What is it that his own children aren't ready to hear? Well, that house, the childhood home he spoke of, is now just a shell, a ruin. The walls are blackened by fire, scarred and crumbling. The roof has caved in, surrendering to the sky. And while nature is slowly, patiently trying to reclaim the stone and the land, a stark, weathered sign stands as a permanent reminder that what happened here wasn't natural at all. It was the product of man, of hate, of war, of unimaginable suffering. The sign reads, "Ne prilazite," do not come near. Even today, 3 decades after it was abandoned, the fields around that house are infested with landmines. A hidden deadly legacy of the conflict that tore his world apart. But Luka's life didn't begin in chaos. For the first 6 years, his world was one of peace nestled in the Velebit Mountains of Croatia. He lived with his grandparents, and it was his grandfather, also named Luka, who was his first hero. He was a shepherd, and he taught young Luka the ways of the mountains, how to tend to the flock, how to navigate the rugged terrain, how to hunt, how to survive in the wild. It was an idyllic, simple life. Looking back, it feels almost as if his grandfather knew on some deep, instinctual level that dark times were coming. As if he was desperately trying to arm his beloved grandson with the strength and resilience he would need to face a world he couldn't possibly imagine. And then, it happened. In 1991, the war for Croatian independence exploded, transforming from a distant rumble into a living nightmare. A Serbian militia, the Chetniks, swept through the countryside. Their methods were brutal. Their goals simple: drive the Croatians from their homes and eliminate anyone who dared to resist. Town by town, village by village, the terror spread. They eventually reached the mountains where Luka's family lived. Most fled, but the Modrics, perhaps believing their small, isolated home would be overlooked, decided to stay. It was a fatal miscalculation. One crisp December morning, his grandfather left the house just as he had 1,000 times before leading his sheep towards a familiar pasture. As he walked, a faint, unfamiliar sound began to cut through the mountain silence. A mechanical growl. By the time he realized what it was, by the time he saw the figures approaching, it was too late. The Chetniks had found him. They didn't care that he was alone. They didn't care that he was a 66-year-old man simply going about his day tending to his animals. They just mowed him down with their machine guns, leaving his body on the cold earth. He was just a few hundred yards from his home. Back at the house, the family heard the sudden violent burst of gunfire. Panic seized them. For the next few hours, they were trapped in an agonizing limbo of fear and uncertainty. They knew going out to search for him was a death sentence, so they could only wait praying, listening to the deafening silence, suspecting the very worst. As time stretched on, the terrible truth began to settle in their hearts. He was the target. Eventually, Luka's father Stipe couldn't bear it any longer. He slipped out of the house, his heart pounding, and went to find his father. He dragged the body back home. In that small, silent room filled with a grief too big for words, Stipe told his young son to say his last goodbye. Luka, in his own words, recalls the moment with haunting clarity. "I wasn't able to grasp that was the last time I would ever see him. My heart breaks every time I think of him dying literally on his doorstep. That was the moment everything changed." They knew they had to run. They left everything behind, their home, their memories, their entire world, and fled. Soon after they escaped, a relative who had stayed behind sent them word. They had gotten out just in time. The Chetniks had returned to their little house in the mountains, set it ablaze, and surrounded it with landmines, ensuring they could never, ever come back. After a desperate journey, the Modric family finally made their way to the coastal city of Zadar. They found what they prayed would be a safe haven, checking into the Hotel Kolovar, which, like many buildings, had been converted into a refugee shelter. For a short while, a fragile sense of normalcy returned. Luka's father found work as a mechanic for the Croatian army, and little Luka, in the shadow of war, enrolled in his first youth football club, NK Zadar, whose stadium was just a stone's throw from the hotel. But the war wasn't finished with them. Soon the air raid sirens began to wail over Zadar. The bombing started. The fear came rushing back, a familiar cold dread. The hotel corridors would echo with shouts and hurried footsteps as families scrambled for the underground shelters, huddling together in the dark, waiting for the explosions to stop. And yet, through all of it, there was football. Whenever practice wasn't canceled by the threat of an attack, Luka was a revelation. In the parking lot of the hotel with a deflated old ball, he would play for hours. The game a shield against the chaos. His first coaches worried. He was so small, so frail. They feared he'd be snapped in two by the bigger boys. But then they saw him play. As his first coach famously said, the ball seemed to stick to his foot. It was like magic. They also saw something else in his eyes, a fierce determination. A hardness that the other kids just didn't have. His trauma had forged a different kind of strength in him. He played like his life depended on it, because in a way, it had. His family was so poor when they arrived that they couldn't even afford to buy him proper shin guards. So his father, ever resourceful, would find old planks of wood and carve them into shape, strapping them to his son's small legs. A makeshift shield for a boy already fighting battles no child ever should. As the war finally drew to a close, Luka, now 10 years old, began to get his first taste of the brutal realities of professional football. He and his family, without telling his local club, traveled to the famed academy of Hajduk Split for a trial. It was his first big chance. He played his heart out, but after watching him, the coaches sent him away with a crushing verdict. They couldn't see this boy going anywhere. Too small, too weak. The dream was over before it began. Imagine being that 10-year-old kid with all that talent, a fire forged in adversity, only to be told you have no future in the game you love. What do you think was going through his mind in that moment? How do you possibly find the strength to keep going after a rejection like that? Especially after everything you've already endured? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear them. When his local coach at Zadar eventually found out about the secret trip, he wasn't angry. He didn't resent Luka or his family. Instead, he understood. He saw the burning ambition in the boy and knew he needed a bigger stage. So he made a call that would change the course of Croatian football history. He reached out to a man named Zdravko Mamić, who at the time was just a football agent, but was on his way to becoming one of the most powerful and controversial figures in the nation's sport. Mamić would eventually become the biggest stain on Modric's career. But on that day, he was a lifeline. In an incredible leap of faith, Mamić took the word of a complete stranger, a small-town coach, and took Luka under his wing. He saw something, a flicker of greatness, and when Luka was just 15, he orchestrated his first major transfer to the powerhouse club, Dinamo Zagreb. Once in the capital, he was housed with two other young prospects in a similar situation, Vedran Chorluka and Hrvoje Čale. The three of them became inseparable brothers, in ambition pushing each other on and off the pitch. But just as they turned 18, their dreams hit a brutal roadblock. The club delivered some harsh news they were all being loaned out to Zrinski Mostar in the Bosnian League. This wasn't a development loan. The Bosnian League was notorious, a place so physically punishing, so unforgiving, that they say it's where clubs send players they want to get rid of. It was a graveyard for talent. And for Modric, known for his slight frame and not his physical strength, everyone expected him to fail miserably, to be broken. But they didn't know Luka Modric. Instead of being broken, he became the club's savior. He didn't just survive, he dominated. He dragged Zrinski Mostar out of the jaws of relegation, and in a league that was supposed to be too rough for him, the 18-year-old refugee kid shocked everyone by winning the award for the league's best player. It was a career-defining achievement, a statement of pure, unyielding will. And still, Dinamo Zagreb wasn't fully convinced. They sent him out on another loan this time to a smaller Croatian club, Inter Zaprešić. And what happened next is almost comical. Modric was so utterly dominant, so clearly a level above everyone else, that halfway through the season, little Inter Zaprešić was sitting in second place in the Croatian league. Modric was named the league's Young Player of the Year. Meanwhile, back at his parent club, Dinamo Zagreb were having one of their worst seasons in history, fighting for their lives in the relegation playoffs. A crisis they might not have survived if they hadn't, in a moment of desperation, and recalled their loaned-out prodigy to save them. Once that season was over, Modric received his first real paycheck, his first bit of significant money. He didn't even think twice. He didn't buy a car or flashy clothes. He took every penny and bought his family a flat in Zadar. After years of living as refugees in a hotel, they finally had a proper home again, a place of their own. He had conquered Croatia, but the Premier League was a different beast entirely. His journey was about to get even crazier, filled with new challenges and incredible triumphs. We tell stories just like this every week here on Legends of Football League, tales of underdogs, icons, and forgotten heroes. So if you love the beautiful game and its incredible stories, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you never miss out. Over the next 3 years at Dinamo, Modric became the heart of a dynasty. He linked up with future stars like Dejan Lovren, his old roommate Chorluka, the often forgotten Brazilian-Croatian wonder kid Eduardo da Silva, and eventually the formidable Mario Mandzukic. It was a golden generation. They led Dinamo from a disappointing 7th-place finish to winning the league title 3 years in a row. Modric was the undisputed king, winning the league's Player of the Year award twice. In his final season, his statistics were mind-boggling for a midfielder: 13 goals and 11 assists, a goal contribution roughly every 82 minutes. They won the league by an astonishing 28-point margin. He had set himself up as one of the most exciting young talents in all of Europe. The Giants came calling. Barcelona, Arsenal, Manchester City, Chelsea, they were all interested. But Modric, ever the underdog, opted for a move to Tottenham Hotspur, who shattered their transfer record, paying an impressive $16.5 million to bring the Croatian maestro to North London. And at first, it was a disaster. Everything that could go wrong did go wrong. He suffered a knee injury just 4 matches into his career. He was played out of position by a manager who didn't seem to understand his unique gifts. And worse, Tottenham was in a period of horrific form, managing only 1 win in his first 10 matches. The English press, ruthless as ever, began to sharpen their knives, questioning his talent, his physique, his price tag. They labeled him a flop. But then everything changed with the arrival of a new manager, Harry Redknapp. Redknapp didn't see a frail, lightweight foreigner. He saw a football genius. He fell in love with Modric's talent instantly and made a decision that would turn their season around. He built the entire team around him. The effect was instantaneous. The team's form completely flipped. They went on a run of 10 matches with only a single defeat. Modric was the conductor, and the orchestra was finally playing his tune. The following season, he impressed even further. Despite suffering a broken leg, his influence only grew. Redknapp was effusive in his praise, calling him a manager's dream, a player who trains like a demon and never complains. He made a bold claim: he could get into any team in the top 4. And he was proven right. That season, Tottenham finished in the top 4 for the first time in 21 years, qualifying for the Champions League for the very first time. Paired with a young explosive winger named Gareth Bale, the two of them set Europe alight. They went on a crazy, unforgettable Champions League run, knocking out giants like Inter Milan and AC Milan. Bale was deservedly named the PFA Player of the Year, but inside the club, Modric was named Tottenham's Player of the Year. Even the great Sir Alex Ferguson weighed in, stating that, in his opinion, Modric had been the superior player that season. It was at this point that Modric began to show his more controversial, headstrong side. Convinced he needed to move to a club that could challenge for the biggest trophies, he tried to force a transfer to London rivals Chelsea. First, he went public with his desire to leave, and when that didn't work, he flat out refused to play in the first league match of the season. But the chairman, Daniel Levy, is famously stubborn. Tottenham rejected every single offer, forcing him to stay for 1 more year. Unfortunately, the drama cast a shadow over his season, and while he still played well, it was a more understated year. By the end of it, a move was inevitable. But instead of Chelsea, it was the mighty Real Madrid who came calling, securing his signature for just £30 million, a full £10 million less than what Chelsea had offered the previous summer. His time in England was over. And just to prove he was on a different level now, he won his first trophy with Madrid, the Spanish Super Cup, only 36 hours after signing his contract. He was clearly not playing for Tottenham anymore. However, once again he struggled immensely at his new club. It was the Jose Mourinho era at Madrid, and while it had been exciting by then, the locker room was a toxic mess. Fights and arguments seemed to break out every single week. And with a brilliant, established midfield trio of Sami Khedira, Mesut Ozil, and Xabi Alonso, there just wasn't a natural place for Modric. Mourinho played him out of position, and Luka watched as the club fell as far as 16 points behind Barcelona by the time Christmas came around. With the team struggling, the media needed a scapegoat. And with his relatively high price tag and an unimpressive stat line of just 1 goal and 1 assist, they all pointed the finger at the little Croatian. The influential Spanish newspaper Marca ran a poll, and their readers officially named Luka Modric as the worst signing of the season. Could they have been any more wrong? In the second half of that season, Modric took over. It was like a switch had been flipped. He started to dictate the play, to show the genius that had been hidden. He assisted the winning goal in a crucial El Clasico against Barcelona. He scored a thunderous long-range winning goal at Old Trafford to knock Manchester United out of the Champions League. He was distinguishing himself as one of the team's best and most consistent players. This transformation only became more significant with the arrival of Carlo Ancelotti as manager. Under the calm, trusting guidance of the Italian, Modric took the leap from being just a key player to becoming a legend. He was the beating heart of the team that would go on to win the historic La Decima Real Madrid's 10th Champions League title. And in the final with Madrid, seconds away from defeat, it was his perfect arching corner kick that found the head of Sergio Ramos to score the equalizing goal that would change the history of the club forever. And yet, unbelievably, Modric wasn't even nominated for the Ballon d'Or that year. The following season started with a devastating hamstring injury that kept him out for 4 long months. 2015 wouldn't be his year either. but it was the year that made his influence blindingly obvious to everyone. Without him pulling the strings in midfield, Real Madrid failed to win a single trophy. Still, there was a silver lining. The team's poor results eventually led to the dismissal of the manager. We don't talk about Rafa Benitez and the incredible appointment of a club legend, Zinedine Zidane. This move would set off one of the most dominant dynasties in the history of modern football. They won the Champions League in Zidane's very first year, with the French icon describing Modric as a master of the game, the essential connector that made the entire team possible. That kind of praise finally earned him his first Ballon d'Or nomination, even if he only received a single vote. But don't worry, because the following season, a second consecutive Champions League title would come, this time with Modric providing a crucial assist in the final. This incredible performance didn't just cement his status as a Madrid legend. It bumped him up to a fifth-place finish in the Ballon d'Or voting and earned him the UEFA Midfielder of the Year award. After 2 years of mind-blowing consistency, Modric was forcing himself into the debate for the best player in the world. And then came 2018. The stars aligned, and he lived a year that was unforgettable, historic, and to be perfectly honest, deeply controversial. It started with a bang. Right before the calendar year even began, Modric took over the spotlight, winning the Golden Ball for the best player in the tournament as Real Madrid won the Club World Cup. Then, he orchestrated an insane Champions League knockout run that saw them win the whole thing for a third consecutive time, a feat no one had managed in the Champions League era. And finally, he joined his beloved Croatia for the 2018 World Cup. It was supposed to be the absolute cherry on the cake of a perfect year. But before that, a string of decisions and relationships going back more than a decade culminated in one of the lowest, most shameful points of his entire life. Remembers Zdravko Mamić? The agent who took a chance on Modric before he'd even seen him play, Mamić had become the undisputed king of Croatian football, eventually rising to become the executive director of Dinamo Zagreb. But to get there, he did pretty much everything you can imagine. Shady business deals during the war, scamming young players with predatory contracts that siphoned off their future earnings, making death threats to any journalist who dared to cross him, match-fixing, tax evasion, bribery. You name it. He became one of the most wanted and most universally hated men in all of Croatia. In 2018, having already survived one assassination attempt, the law finally caught up with him. He was sentenced to 6 years in prison, but before they could arrest him, he fled the country. So what does any of this have to do with Luka Modric? Well, his transfer to Tottenham was one of Mamic's shadiest deals. He had concocted a transfer bonus out of thin air, forcing Dinamo to pay him and Modric a combined 10 million euros. When the investigation started, Modric initially came out in public denouncing Mamić and everything he had done. But when the time came to speak in court under oath, he completely backtracked on every single statement he had made. It was already a terrible look for the national team captain, but it became so much worse when Mamić was officially sentenced. The Croatian authorities weren't finished. They charged Luka Modric with perjury for lying in court. He was now facing his own trial with the very real possibility of being sentenced to 5 years in prison. Why he chose to lie in court remains a subject of intense debate. But by aligning himself with the hated Mamić, Modric became a national disappointment overnight. The hero had fallen. There were hateful chants being sung about him at matches. Public figures spoke out against him. And in a cruel twist of irony, someone painted a huge, ugly piece of graffiti on the very hotel in Zadar where he grew up as a refugee. It read, "Modric is Mamić's bitch." Threatened with 5 years in prison, with the entire country seemingly turned against him, nobody thought Modric had a chance of performing at the World Cup. It seemed impossible. Before his first game at the pre-match press conference, the very first question from a journalist was about how he felt regarding the trial. Modric, his face like thunder, didn't like it one bit. He hit back, snarling. "You got nothing smarter to ask," and then the tournament started, and he immediately defiantly took it over. He was named the best player of the entire group stage as he led Croatia to top a World Cup group for the first time in their history. In the round of 16 against Denmark, despite missing a crucial penalty late in extra time, he stepped up again in the shootout and scored as Croatia went through. Then came his incredible, masterful performances against Russia and England, dragging his team through sheer force of will to their first-ever World Cup final. In the end, Croatia finally fell, losing 4-2 to a brilliant French team. But Modric had given everything. He ran more than any other player in the tournament, and his performance cemented his place as the tournament's best player, earning him the prestigious Golden Ball. The resilience of that Croatian team led by Modric is a story that every football fan should hear. If this part of his journey inspired you, consider sharing this video with a friend who loves an underdog story. And while you're at it, let us know in the comments which legend story you want us to tell next. When he returned to his hometown of Zadar after the tournament, tens of thousands of people were waiting for him. The villain had become the hero again. In the space of one incredible month, Luka Modric had made up for a year of letdowns and controversy. After a few more great performances to start the season with Real Madrid, including a goal and an assist in the final of the Club World Cup, December arrived, and it turned out to be the greatest month of his entire life. First of all, in a stunning turn of events, all the perjury charges against him were dropped. He was a free man. And second of all, after a decade of complete and utter dominance by Lionel Messi and Cristiano Ronaldo, Luka Modric became the first player to break their duopoly and win the Ballon d'Or. It was a controversial one for sure, and I'm sure many of you will make sure to point that out in the comments. But regardless of whether you think he deserved it, that's not the point of this story. The point is perhaps best summed up in a quote by Modric himself, reflecting on his journey. "With every achievement, memories of war of my childhood come to my mind. I think about him, my grandpa. It's difficult, knowing he didn't get to see what I achieved. Still, the fairy tale couldn't last forever." The following season, possibly due to the departure of both CR7 and Zidane, Real Madrid struggled severely. In the space of a single horrific week, they lost twice to Barcelona, were knocked out of the Champions League, and were eliminated from the Copa del Rey. Modric would later call it the hardest time of his career. The critics came back out claiming he was getting too old, that the magic was gone. But once again, they were wrong. He would bounce back over the following 2 years, defying age, defying expectations. And at 36 years old, he performed incredibly, becoming one of the main architects of one of Real Madrid's most improbable and spectacular Champions League campaigns, ever, coming back from losing positions in all 3 knockout ties that preceded the final. With a pass so beautiful it should be hanging in a museum that outside of the boot. Through ball to Rodrigo against Chelsea, he reminded the world of his genius. And in the end, he lifted the famous trophy for the 5th time in his career. From a refugee boy with wooden shin guards to a 5-time Champions League winner and Ballon d'Or recipient, his is a story of survival, of resilience, and of a love for the game that conquered all. And that's where this incredible football story concludes. What a journey, right? I'm so eager to hear your thoughts. What moment stood out to you the most? Did this player's struggle resonate with you? Please share all your opinions, your favorite moments, and any questions you have in the comments below. I truly love reading them and building this amazing football community with all of you.